Depending on the size you use, you need about 2 of these bottles to do the work of one. That April Fresh smell, too. April Fresh Downy. More economical than you thought.
Bobby hates cavities. Crest and test this toothpaste instead. Then came his first checkup. Fortunately, Bobby was testing a new kind of Crest with a special new cavity-fighting formula called Fluorostat. And clinical tests with thousands of children proved new Crest is significantly more effective at fighting cavities than Crest. So Bobby got better checkups than he'd ever had. New Fluorostat formula Crest with more fight than ever before.
Hello, I'm Harvey Burritt of Burritt Brothers Carpets. We have a special on carpet cleaning. Until the end of February, you'll save 20% off the regular price. This is a chance for you to get a first-class job at a bargain price. Wall-to-wall is cleaned in your home. We have a full pickup and delivery service for area rugs. So it's 20% off carpet cleaning until the end of February. We're Burritt Brothers Carpets, and we've been in the carpet business since 1907.
Coming up next, Webster.
Good morning. More trouble, I hesitate to point out, at the Senator Hotel, that refuge for youngsters from the streets and drugs and sex on our beautiful, wonderful Granville Street. So yesterday I gave myself an assignment. And my assignment was to go to the Senator Hotel and have a talk to the people who run it and what happens inside it. And you'll meet some of the youngsters who are in the Senator now. Here's what one says to my question. One young girl here who must not turn around to look at the camera wanted to say something. I kind of insinuated that she had been turning tricks on the street.
Not all the people, one thing I hate about what they say in the paper, not all the kids that live in here are all prostitutes.
A very valid point. You're going to meet some of these kids, learn about some of the problems. We've already taken you around the juvenile jail, done stuff on the Maples. Now we go to perhaps some of the grassroots of the problems on Granville Street, Davie Street, and the kids in the Senator Hotel. And you know, it's hard to believe, but the battle's still going on about the Skagit Valley. Because, for 34 years I know of, the battle has been going on. For about 50 years, in fact, it's been going on. And there's an organization called ROS, Run Out the Skagit Spoilers. Now here this morning to discuss the problems on the Skagit are Ray Williston, President of BC Cellulose, who was a Social Credit Cabinet Minister who signed the finite deal between British Columbia and the city of Seattle in 1967. And here to oppose him and to campaign for action now to save this magnificent valley is Dr. Thomas Perry of the Ross Committee. And the Skagit will be our first item after the break. I hope to generate more light than heat in this discussion between Mr. Williston and Dr. Perry. Some of the basic facts with which nobody can at the moment quarrel is that in 1967, the deal was signed between Seattle and Ray Williston, who was the Social Credit Cabinet Minister, to increase the height of the Ross Dam to give Seattle more power. Since then, the controversy has raged back and forward, up and down, round the corners. Ecology and environmental people went into full gear for many years. In the 70s sometimes, the NDP made the Skagit Valley into a recreation area. Whether or not they were right to do that, I don't know yet. But just recently now, the IJC, the International Joint Commission, we're told, is reconsidering the deal, and that there will be hearings this winter, and that a decision is expected sometime in the spring of this year from the IJC, perhaps to overturn an order back in the 40s authorizing the dam. Now, before we get into nitty-gritty, I want to get from you, Mr. Williston, the legal situation on this thing right now. When you signed the deal in 1967, you've been perpetually accused of giving away our birthright for a mess of pottage, some $35,000, I think it was, a year. Now, what was the deal, first of all, that you made in the Ross Dam, and when was it, this whole thing, when did it begin back in history?
Well, Jack, the propaganda certainly got to you, I guess, because the Ross concept was first approved in 1920 before the Gorge Dam was built in 1924.
Right.
And it's a system plan. You've got to understand that you can't go into a river and touch one project and another project and another project. You have to engineer the whole river to a whole plan. And the whole river of the Skagit was approved, started in conceptual form in 1920, and that was brought to British Columbia, and approval gained in 1920 for the conceptual plan of the Skagit River. Every step that the city of Seattle has taken since that time, they have secured approval of British Columbia in advance before they have done anything. When I came to 1967, I had nothing to do with it. All I was doing in 1967 was dealing with the compensation. I had nothing whatsoever to do with whether the project would go or whether the project would not go in 1967.
You mean the deal was made?
The deal had been made, and British Columbia had passed laws in 1947 that it could be flooded. The IJC had had me up on 2 occasions why I didn't let this proceed, and it was just basically on the compensation. The propagandists have completely distorted the picture on the Skagit River, and nobody's got it.
I'll come to the propagandists in a moment, if we can call Dr. Perry that in the best sense. What was the deal you signed for the compensation? Because it seemed picayune.
I signed the deal in 1967 in compensation for half the power that the flooded water on the valley would produce. And until that came, and there's no power, there's nothing to share, we worked the value of the water at 3.75 mils per kilowatt as to our entitlement, and it came out to about $35,000 or some odd $1,000. And Dave Barrett and everybody else said for all time that I had signed this away on a rental. That's a lot of malarkey. We signed that on the basis of half the power, which was exactly the same agreement we had on the Columbia River.
You're telling me now that if it does go ahead, therefore, you'll get half the power, or the cash value at today's prices for half the power.
We can take half the power and we can sell it or do whatever we wish with it.
Now, I've got to explain here, before I come to Dr. Perry, that this deal in 67 was to add 122 feet to the major Ross Dam,
right,
flooding 21 square kilometers of Canadian beautiful recreational soil.
Oh, if you get up there in that mud flat today, even the people that show it, and I think Dr. Perry would likely say when he's got a sign up there, he hasn't got the sign, they've got a sign near the bridge say it's going to be flooded from there. It's not going to be flooded from there. That's the best place to take pictures and to get up information, but there's a lovely straight stretch of the river that they show a sign and say it's going to be flooded to here. It's not going to be flooded to here. You can see it in any map, and you can see where the road crosses the bridge and where everybody takes it. It's below that.
Well, now, let's argue about that later. Here's a proposition put to us by Williston, by Ray Williston. that this is a legal deal signed with all legislative authorities and a total commitment between British Columbia and the City of Seattle as of now and for the foreseeable future.
That's right. That's right.
Now,
Unless somebody wants to buy them off and Seattle wants to pay. And people don't want to come to the fact that they want to pay off Seattle. Seattle has put the foundations in for a Ross Dam, and they had a law passed by our legislature before they did it to bring that to the required 100 feet higher. And now people say, oh, well, just brush it off. They didn't do anything. Anybody in grade 4 physics can tell you that you have to put substantially more cost into a dam.
Has Seattle ever said, okay, we won't build this higher dam, or we won't put the height on the dam if you, BC, will pay compensation?
That's right. They say, what kind of compensation are you going to pay? And we haven't got enough money in British Columbia to pay the compensation.
Now, that's the basic case. Does the IJC have any authority over this deal between the City of Seattle and British Columbia?
Well, the IJC have approved it, yes. They've given it the stamp of approval in 1942, and now people are trying to say there weren't enough people there or something, and they're trying to stop the agreement that they had in 42.
Dr. Perry.
Well, Jack, I feel as if I've been buried under an avalanche of misinformation. It's hard to know where to begin. I finally understand now why Mr. Williston and I have had so much disagreement over the years. First of all, I really do scarcely know where to begin. First of all, Mr. Williston has said that he signed a deal which would have given British Columbia 50% of the power generated by storage in BC. That's totally incorrect. The true figure is about 2%. I have the figures right here from the Water Rights Branch in Victoria to prove it. These are based on a meeting of July 14th, 1964, which was 3 years prior to the deal that Mr. Williston signed, and he's just completely wrong about that.
Listen a minute. You're saying that Mr. Williston is wrong when he says that his deal was for half the power or the cash equivalent at the market rate.
I'm saying he's totally off the wall. He signed a deal which would have given 2%. He did have the foresight to arrange that British Columbia could take power instead of money. I credit him for that foresight, and that did that would suffice to give us 2% of the total production.
Where do you get the 2%? He's saying half the power.
Well, I'd like to know where he gets his figure, because this is from the Water Rights Branch in Victoria. These are the official figures.
The Water Rights Branch that Dr. Perry is quoting at the present time are the same officials that I had for advisors for about 18 years. They are the same people that took the Columbia River Treaty. They're the same people who did the technical work that he is now quoting and coming back some years later. The men, and I can't quarrel with him because I don't know specifically what it is, whether it's the raise or whether he's taking the total amount of water or what he's taking. I don't know what he's taking.
From your understanding,
but from my understanding, we got the same fundamental agreement that we had in the Columbia River from the amount of stored water which we had over those 6,000 acre feet that we had in British Columbia for that period of time.
Well, I think perhaps it would have been excusable if that's what Mr. Williston had signed, but I think, frankly, it's totally inexcusable. He is the one who was the minister for 15, 20 years. I'm not a professional propagandist, I'm a physician, and yet I know the facts much better than he does. And I think, frankly, it's a disgrace, but let me point out to you how that figure was determined, in fact. Basically, the officials in his branch took the total volume of water which would be stored within British Columbia, assumed that that volume of water would pass over the dams downstream in Washington State in 1 year,
Right.
applied the power rental fees which would have been charged to BC Hydro, let us say for Bennett Dam, applied the storage fees at 0.1 cents per acre foot, and applied the Crown Land flooding fee from a schedule of 1962, which was 25 cents per acre.
Ah, I've got that. Now, that figure you're showing there is the figure which is widely quoted as the annual rental of $34,000.
Right.
Does that help you to understand it, Mr. Williston?
It doesn't understand it at all, because what he's quoting is completely out of context and what they're doing. In the first place, there's new water fees have just been signed in British Columbia, and he knows that as well as I do. And to try and indicate that the water fees on British Columbia Power don't apply is some kind of the propaganda that people are putting out at the present time.
Well, Jack, it's as
There-
simple as this. In a dam that is located in British Columbia, like the Benestead Dam and the Williston Reservoir, the benefits of the stored water accrue to British Columbians. In this case, all of the power benefits accrued to the United States, and all of the damage was done in Canada. And what Mr. Williston did was simply apply the same formula that he had as if the dam had been built within British Columbia for British Columbians. That's where the sellout was, and that's where it still is.
Mr. Williston didn't do it. We passed laws. I think that the time has come, Jack, when we ought to have some intestinal integrity in this country. Our people agreed before the city of Seattle built that dam that that land would be flooded. They were told to buy the land in 1931 that would be affected. They bought it. They were told to lease the land. A lease cannot be obtained, regardless of what he says. The lease says you're only allowed a lease for the purpose for which it happens to be given. The lease has been taken and paid for in all those years on the basis that it was going to be flooded land. We have a little bit of integrity. We passed a law in our legislature letting them in 1947, let them pass it. Now we say, no, you can't. And they took action after that was done.
Okay, now hold it. You'll respond to that immediately after the break. Now, here's the confrontation, which is enlightening. On one side, I have Ray Williston, who was a social credit cabinet minister who signed for BC the contract in 1967, a legal and binding contract authorized by acts of the British Columbia legislature. Dr. Perry from Ross, is he correct in that a legal and binding contract authorized by acts of the BC legislature commits British Columbia to this deal with Seattle?
Well, this is a much more complicated question. First of all,
Why is that complicated? I mean,
let's take the question of authorization by the legislature. The authorization was given in 1947, 10 years before Mr. Williston signed the agreement.
Right.
Mr. Williston...
20 years.
Mr. Williston...
67.
20 years, you're right. Mr. Williston has stated that the agreement was debated in the legislature. In letters to me, he's stated that in writing. It was never debated in the legislature, to the best of my knowledge.
Skagit.
It was the agreement between Seattle and British Columbia, which we've just discussed, was signed as an order in council and was a secret agreement of the British Columbia cabinet.
Well, just stop there for a moment.
It was not a secret agreement. I can take in my speeches in the legislature in 1967, and I still keep them, and there wasn't even one single question asked about the Skagit. That's why these people won't come back and speak to you. They make all the speeches, they say what you did. And he's been telling me this morning all the things that I did. I'm the fellow that did them, and I've been in public life now for 25 or 30 years, and I've had to back up very little in 25 or 30 years.
Now, let's take this point, though. Is there a legal contract between the city of Seattle and British Columbia on the construction of the Ross Dam, the extra 100 feet?
Well, I must tell you that the position of the Ross Committee and the British Columbia government, of the present British Columbia government, is that the contract with Seattle is not legal.
No, but I mean, looking at it on the face of it, I mean, I'm not trying, you may well be right. We perhaps shouldn't have this land flooded. It may be our birthright and all the rest of that stuff, and I sympathize with you. But surely, and I've been around, I have these speeches in the legislature, surely there is a contract which must be overturned by someone.
Exactly.
A legal contract.
This is the contract here. But again, let's not kid ourselves about Seattle's good citizenliness. And again, I'd like to come back to several things Mr. Williston said in opening which were factually incorrect. Let's be very clear about this. Seattle did not have approval for High Ross Dam before it began construction of the dam. The first phase of the dam was begun in 1937. Now, he may dispute this. The facts are in the record. The foundation plaque of the dam will tell you when it was begun.
You're saying in 37 they went ahead on the base without authority?
With the base of the dam without authority from the International Joint Commission.
I have no information other than that was a part of the work
Complex.
that was with the complex, and the whole complex was approved. He doesn't have to go back in 37. The whole complex was approved, as I told you, in 1920. So what he's saying of that, we approved the high-level business in 1920. I don't care what he says and whether I'm lying in 1930. It's an agreement for, and they had to buy the land inside that in 1931. Don't give us that stuff.
He's
they
quite
had
correct
to buy
about
it.
that.
Sure.
I don't mean to paint Seattle City Light as an unremitting ogre, but let's also not be clear that they're some sort of white knight in shining armor. They began the construction of the dam before they had international approval. Of course, that stage of the dam...
That's now beside the point.
Yes. They flooded into Canada in 1953.
Illegally.
Illegally.
And paid compensation.
That's unquestionable.
They paid $5,000
They paid the most minimal compensation, $5,000 for power and energy, which were probably worth between $100,000 and $1 million per year. Since then, they have paid $5,000 a year up to 1967, and $35,000 a year since then for power which is worth at least $1 million a year.
I don't want to be unkind and unfair to you. I think all of that for the moment, to understand it, and if I have forgotten some of the details, God knows what people out there don't know. We now have a situation where Seattle says they have a legal contract with BC, correct?
Correct.
BC says they have a legal contract with Seattle.
No, British Columbia denies that the contract is legal.
They have a contract, Jack, and all our actions in Canada and in British Columbia speak that case. When we tried, and when the people tried, and the NDP government tried to stop the building of the High Ross, they sent our officials to Seattle and to Washington to try and stop the action in Washington. Those people went, our officials went. They were not allowed to speak on behalf of the British Columbia government. They had to speak as individuals, even though their expenses were paid by the government of British Columbia. Anybody who has a legal understanding knows that. The government of Canada, remember way back when they started this business, and Jack Davis started in 1970, and they came to me and they said, look, the government of Canada is against this. We will do everything you ask us to do. They would take absolutely no responsibility for doing anything themselves because they would be liable, Jack.
Gentlemen, what I want to get at, oh, by the way, if you could go back 50 years, would you personally have initiated or signed this agreement? If you could go back to 1920?
Well, if you can see everything today, but if I was looking at power in the wilderness, yes, I would have signed it in 1920.
Right now, how... We'll take your case as proven for the moment. This is a great loss of recreational land to Canada, to British Columbia. Is there any way this can be stopped, apart from Seattle falling into the Pacific Ocean?
Yes, I hope you won't just take my case as proven. I've brought some slides which I'd like to show you later.
More important for me is a report to find where we go from here.
Yeah.
If Mr. Williston's correct, and I believe he is, that Seattle would have to have millions in compensation not to have this increase, how can Seattle be stopped? Who can stop them?
All right, well, I think some of what Mr. Williston said has said is correct. And in fact, I think most people agree that British Columbia does have some responsibility to Seattle for having made an agreement apparently in good faith.
Yes, sir.
And British Columbia has accepted this. The Ross Committee has accepted this. I don't know anyone who hasn't.
How do you stop the flooding of Skagit now?
British Columbia has made an offer in 1979 which would supply to Seattle Light the exactly equivalent amount of energy and electrical capacity at rates cheaper than you or I could get them now in British Columbia.
Correct.
That was refused by Seattle.
Correct?
No, and if that were done, and we're in an energy area now, to take back from energy, Jack, we're either in an energy crisis or we're not in an energy crisis, and to stop the creation of energy which has already been approved, and to take energy from British Columbia in perpetuity into Seattle, I think that's the real crime that we're talking about. We either have got an energy crisis or we haven't got an energy crisis, and we're kidding ourselves right now. That's the best kind of energy. It's located in the best place. And unless you're going to do something about it, I think we're completely out of our tree right now.
Let's just look at whether this is the best kind of energy.
Take your case as proven. How can you stop the construction of the High Ross?
Well, we're relying on two things. One, first of all, we've always relied on our own government to have a bit of backbone and to say an error is an error. No contract is sacred. This is not the word of God. This is an agreement of human beings, and human beings can make mistakes. And that it should not be incumbent upon British Columbia to honor an agreement which is so ridiculously and grossly unfair. We're also saying...
in other words, I've got to stop you there for the moment because I must take my breaks. I'm pushed this morning. You're saying British Columbia should reject the contract and attempt to buy off Seattle, right?
Right.
After the break. Well, we're in the heart of the storm over the Skagit now. A story which I've turned my eyes away from because it becomes so boring over the years. But let's get back to cases now. We've established the fact that Mr. Williston says, and you agree, that there is a legal contract of some kind.
There is a contract.
And you say, such is the need for preserving Canadian ecology in this gorgeous valley, that we should now renege on the contract and offer them money.
Well, we feel, as the British Columbia government does, that they are entitled to some sort of compensation for the term of the agreement, and that probably what is most sensible is to supply them equivalent energy and electrical power. There are two sources of this. We're not in an energy crisis right now. In fact, we're exporting large amounts of power to the U.S. when it's surplus to us. There is unused capacity at the 7 Mile Dam on the Pend d'Oreille River, which could be achieved by flooding a small stretch of canyon within Washington State. The dam has already been built by British Columbia Hydro to a height sufficient to do that. If that flooding is realized within a canyon between two dams in Washington State, that would generate about half of the electricity that High Ross would. The remainder could come from the BC Hydro pool and has been offered to Seattle at the lowest industrial bulk rate, which is cheaper than you or I could get it.
You were a director of BC Hydro for many years. You were the minister in charge. What do you say to this proposition from left field?
Well, I say from a business standpoint, it's completely irrational. The city of Seattle controls that flood area behind the 6 Mile Dam, and the city of Seattle is not going to sell out what they already control. BC Hydro, as Dr. Perry has said, has already built the dam. We can already get the best deal possible for British Columbia on power by raising that and using the additional head. But Seattle isn't going to do it if we take away from them, and it's an either or. That is the most valuable power to Seattle. It's right close to Seattle for peaking purposes and other kind of things. There's absolutely no way that something halfway across the province that they have to bring across on the Bonneville power lines is going to be as valuable to Seattle as that which they have in their back door, which they can use themselves.
They have their own lines right there. They own the dam directly upstream.
Well, I don't know.
They haven't got their whole line to Seattle.
Let's talk about this one. It says here on my carefully researched notes that the IJC is reconsidering the deal again. Do the IJC have any authority to reconsider the deal?
I don't know. The question's being placed to them. I tell you this, that if you go back over IJC decisions and you question this one, then any decision the IJC has made that's controversial in international situations would be also subject to the same thing. And I don't think the IJC faces this. They open up such a can of worms that they'd never be able to close it up again.
I think that's totally wrong. The whole circumstances of the original Skagit decision by the IJC are totally extraordinary. The decision was made in 1942 during the midst of World War II at a time when Canada was losing the war and the U.S. hadn't even entered it yet. There was an urgent need for electrical power for the war effort, and that was the entire rationale at the time for building High Ross Dam as an emergency. It was never built then. The whole consideration given by the IJC was 2 hours. Many of the facts in the transcript of the hearing are wrong or distorted. And it's totally inappropriate that a body like the IJC, which commands public respect in transboundary issues all across the frontier between the U.S. and Canada, shouldn't be able to revise a decision that's so clearly out of date.
Jack, listen. Why should the IJC really, in this relatively small thing, become involved? British Columbia had agreed to it in 1920. They'd made Seattle buy the land in 1931.
They own the land.
The land, the private land that was affected. They made them survey the thing in 1941. They made them survey it. So, and they leased it. When it came to the IJC and what Dr. Perry's talking about, it was a fait accompli. Why bring this all when for 20 years they'd been negotiating with British Columbia? They had made the city of Seattle do certain things. They had done them. They had planned the river. And now you come to the IJC in 1942 and you say, are you going to approve this after we've done it? How stupid can we be?
Let's get down to the 21 kilometers or 24 kilometers are going to be flooded. Is it all that important?
It is all that important.
From my point of view, Seattle's got the deal. They're going to get the power. We've flooded God knows how much in this province. What's so important about Skagit?
That's the whole point, Jack. Low elevation flatland valleys are extremely rare in this province. We're a province of mountains and high tundra areas. We're not a province of extensive flatland areas. This valley is one of the finest recreation sites in the entire lower mainland. One of the richest ecologically, has some of the finest wildlife and fishing in the entire lower mainland, if not the whole province. These aren't opinions, these are facts. You ask somebody like outdoors writers like Lee Straight, who's been writing for The Sun for 20 years before he retired.
I'm a little bit hard-nosed on this, and here we are now going into a recession. Here we are short of energy. Here we are everything. And presumably I know we sell surplus energy from the BC Hydro pool at excess periods during the winter.
I think you should ask the people who use the valley.
This angers me because likely before Dr. Perry was born, I was going into the Skagit Valley. The first time I went into the Skagit Valley was 1939, and it wasn't to that, it was coming down in the other direction. And these people try to imply that all the recreational values and the fishing values of the Skagit are being lost. Before you could even get in here, we used to come in up what is now the Hope Princeton Highway, but on an old trail in there, and come in from the top and come down the Skagit the other way. And that's back in 1939, and all that area can be vastly improved, and from a standpoint of fishing was the area in which we fished. They say it's going to be destroyed with a proper lake elevation held up there so that you can use it from Vancouver. You've got Cultus Lake at the present time, which is completely overused. You've got all that flat area he's talking about that's in the park above the flood area and going up the valley. It's not being flooded. They kid you it's being flooded because they stuck the signpost in the wrong place.
Are you guilty of that? Signpost in the wrong place?
It's totally false. I put in the sign. I put it at exactly the place indicated on the map that Mr. Williston has in front of you. And within 100 yards or so, the only reason it's not more precise is that the provincial government all these years has been unwilling to put in that kind of information for the public itself. And it's up to us citizens, and as soon as we put up the sign, it gets torn down, even though it was in exactly the right place.
Jack,
I'd be curious to know if Mr. Williston has ever been in that part of the Skagit.
There's the bridge. Well, Doctor.
Have you ever been in that part down to Ross Lake?
There, Doctor, there are my pictures. And there, I've just been there just lately. And
Let me see it.
I've been there all the time, and you can see it. So that's the kind of thing they tell you. They tell you you haven't even been there. When
These are your pictures taken by
those
yourself.
are my pictures taken by myself to show. And they show this thing down at the bottom, Jack, with all that crap in it. And they say that's why they don't want it to come up higher. When that was flooded, this was supposed to be under 100 feet of water, and those stumps were never cut out. Even in the CBC show they had here the other day, the young lady said, I don't want to have this crap up. That would be a proper recreational area up to the top level for the use of British Columbia.
What he's saying is that even with a dam, it'd still be an excellent boating recreational area for ordinary people.
Yes, I'd be interested to know when these pictures were taken.
Well, read it. It's got the date on the bottom.
June 15th, 1981.
That's
well,
right.
maybe we could look at some of the other pictures and
We
see
will
what
do
this
after
area
the
is
break.
like.
We will do after the break. This is a key issue which is going to haunt us in British Columbia until it's finally settled one way or the other. Ross, run out the Skagit Spoilers, represented this morning by Dr. Thomas Perry. And the man who signed the agreement in 1967, Ray Williston, then a member of the Social Credit Cabinet in Victoria. On the case, it's quite clear. Ray Williston says, British Columbia must have some integrity. It signed this deal, preparing it with legislative authority as far back as 1920. In 67, it was signed, sealed, and in effect delivered. And you say that it would be a total lack of integrity on our part if we don't honor this deal now. Is that correct?
Absolutely, Jack, because I don't think if any government goes back on its word over the time, when is it any worthwhile signing any agreement with anybody if you're going to tear it up?
But the environmentalists say, and those interested very legitimately say, no, it's not written in stone. It can be cancelled.
We'd say it'd be an
alternate power can be supplied.
It would be an act of colossal stupidity to go ahead with an agreement like this. You'd have to be an idiot to proceed with it.
All right, the people in Jack were idiots because nobody raised a voice against that. That was finally put to bed in 1967. The first time that came up was in 1970 at a Liberal business in North Vancouver when they decided that they were trying to get an issue for the campaign.
Busan.
And they decided the Skagit was going to be there. And the funny part of it was, Jack, that when they were writing me, 3 years after it had all been done, when they were writing me, including Dr. Perry wrote me at the time because he wrote me subsequently and I found out about this at that time. But how I knew about it was whoever was organizing the campaign got all mixed up and sent me the whole letter describing the campaign they had against the Skagit River. So I coupled this up and sent a note and sent it back and said, obviously, I'm not supposed to get this.
Now, fair enough, but I also wanted to get the other aspect quite clear. A contract was signed at that time to be $35,000 a year and taxis of $10,000, and Seattle got the right to flight.
Yeah, and they got benefits which they claim are worth $12 to $15 million per year.
Now, Mr.
Should be, that's right. Should be. I don't, because they've got it there. They can use it for peaking purposes, certainly.
Do you think that's fair, that they should get benefits that large and we should get less than 1% of the benefit when the land that's flooded is our best recreational valley bottom land?
It's not our best recreational, and we can still develop a very fine recreational area there. You're giving an either or. I'm saying you can have one. Remember, everybody in the last years have been camping in the most indiscriminate way possible on lands which are leased to the city of Seattle. If it was in British Columbia, you wouldn't even be able to stop your vehicle there because you get up to the end of the park, as you know right now, and you have to stay in the park site or you have to stay in the forestry areas up there. The only reason that people have been camping in the campers all down there is because it's leased to the city of Seattle and it's not subject to the control of British Columbia. Once you get into the park area, you're not allowed to do what you're doing down there.
I'm sorry, but that's wrong. That area is part of the Skagit Valley Recreation Area and is administered by the Parks Branch.
Yeah, but
there's
they
something
stuff
sleazy
one over
about
the
that
other.
one. There's some, well, I mean, Radford.
Well, I ask you, Jack, do you think it's sleazy for Canadians to control their own land? I think that's basically the question.
No, let me put it this way, and I'm no social credit lover. I try and stay in the middle. When Radford created that Skagit Valley Recreation Area in '73, he did it after his government condemned the program, knowing there was a legal obligation on that leased land.
They did not agree there was a legal obligation.
Does the Skagit Valley Recreation Area cover the Seattle leased land?
Yes, it does.
Well, that's sleazy.
I don't think it's the lease bit sleazy.
Is
I
it
think it's
sleazy?
Either you cancel the lease and pay for them after
Right.
they've been paying for them, or you don't stick something over the top which you can't exercise. That's just stupid.
Next
well,
question.
I agree that the lease should be cancelled. We've been trying to get the government to do that for years.
Well, the NDP wasn't able to cancel the lease.
The NDP returned the checks.
They couldn't, and are the checks still being
They
returned?
didn't
Checks are still being returned.
Let's get off this. That was the $5,000. They did not return the lease fees. Let's not get things. He tells me I'm not giving things straight. They paid the lease fees, and they've continued to pay the lease fees. The $5,000 had nothing to do with the lease
Seattle
fees.
has paid the lease fees, but they've been returned uncashed since 1973.
The lease fees last year, which I went over there and checked, the lease fees that they paid last year were $11,000. Now somebody is crazy.
Well, now, he's got good information. Let's go to the
That
next
would be the
point.
land tax.
Well, if this deal goes through, as it would seem to me it will, because of the obligation, British Columbia, says Mr. Williston, will get half the power at the market value, or cash half the power, or half the power itself once they begin to generate.
No,
Is
that's
that
not,
correct?
no, that's totally false. It would
Well-
be about 2% at most.
Whatever it is, Jack, it's worth about $350,000 today on that 6,000 acres,
feet.
which
This
6,000 acres of
54,
land.
once they develop power, would come up to 350,000.
Well, you could do what you'd like. We could take it back to British Columbia, or we could sell it, could do whatever we wanted with it. But this is an energy crisis time, and we're yelling
Okay,
and bellyaching
let's
about
see
costs.
let's see some of the slides. Slap up some slides, and Dr. Perry and Mr. Williston perhaps can identify them for us. That's the Ross Dam, and it's, geez, a funny-looking dam. It looks upside down.
That was built in 1937, and you see the honeycomb shape. It was built in order to be raised ultimately to a height of...
In other words, that's the one to which they're going to add 100 feet on its present 500.
Exactly.
He comes back, that came back in the flooding, Jack, in 1952. Let's not kid ourselves. It came back and flooded into Canada in 1952. And there was an agreement to pay them by the government. He said there was no agreement. The government put it down. The only reason was that the city of Seattle didn't come up with the money before the government changed. But the agreement again had been reached by British Columbia to accept one lump sum payment of $250,000, and the thing was finished for all time. And Dr. Perry knows that as well as I do.
The point is, no, the point is
What do
Mr.
you mean not
Williston's...
true? The agreement was made for 250,000 cash at that time in 52.
That's correct. When W.A.C. Bennett was first elected, he refused to sign that.
That's right, he stalled. Now,
Yeah, because
next
we
one.
had other problems. In
Next
water.
one. Change the thing. What's that?
This is the drawdown of the reservoir in May of about 1975.
Which side of the border?
This is on the American side of the border, just south of the Canadian border. This is the recreational paradise that Mr. Williston is talking about if the dam is raised.
Mr. Williston?
Well, I mean, in the wintertime, and that's been from the beginning of time. Doesn't matter whether you raise the lamb or you don't raise the lamb. There's 500 acres of that in Canada at the present time. If you negotiate that, which is possible, for the recreational use, say from the 1st of June or the 15th of May into the end of September, that the masses of people from the Vancouver and the southern area can come up and use that both for fishing and boating and all the rest of the thing. In my humble opinion, it's a very valuable asset. And to show that in the winter, they're not going up there in the winter. If the hunter goes up there in the winter, well, it's in a park. You can't hunt in the park anyway.
Next one. What's that?
This is another shot looking north into Canada of the drawdown area of the reservoir in, I believe this was taken in March. Again, this would be pushed north into Canada, where the mudflats are now in the U.S.
In the summertime with the dam, all this would be covered with a pretty lake.
Well, it very much depends what year it is and what time of the summer you're talking about. If you're talking about June 15th, as Mr. Williston said, last year the reservoir was relatively full. That's the area that will be flooded. This scene would be under about 100 feet of water if the dam is raised. This is the finest canoeing stream in southern BC and the best fly fishing.
Mr.
But
Williston?
you can still canoe all the way up above that. He's giving
Totally
you the impression that it's
impossible.
it is not totally impossible. I've been in there since '39, and don't try and give to the people. I saw the other
I've
day.
canoed all
in the
over
canoe.
this country, Mr. Williston, and I'd love to see you canoe the upper stretch of the Skagit River. I don't think...
well,
I don't
Not
think you'd
the
get terribly
absolute
far.
upper stretches, but certainly from the campsite well up you can canoe that. If you can't
Totally
canoe
impossible.
it, you shouldn't be, well, you shouldn't be canoeing then.
I
That's
suggest
all
you
I
have a
say.
look at the new guide that we've put out in the maps in there, and you'll
Not just
find
now,
that.
please. I'll take a break and go to the phones. Now, we're going to telephones. We're going to start in, of all places, Burns Lake. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Webster.
Yes, sir.
First off, is BC government dealing solely with the city government of Seattle, or is the government of Washington State involved in this also?
Mr.
City of
Williston?
Seattle. City of Seattle.
City of Seattle agreed. We've
Yes.
finally got them agreed in something. BC is dealing with the City of Seattle.
I was just wondering because Dixie Lee, the governor of Washington State, hasn't proved very faithful in very many agreements in the past between...
She's not there now.
Isn't she? Oh,
No, Dixie's long gone.
okay, thanks anyway.
Thank you. That is said he was right. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, well, I'm not too much on the politician type of side, but I'd just like to say I've been up to Ross Lake a number of times to do my fishing, and every time I have to go up there, it has to be on the American side. The only time that it gets flooded is in the middle of June, and it comes up maybe, 100 yards from the different shore at the very most, maybe even 100 feet at most parts, and maybe 4 feet in difference.
Do you think the valley should be flooded or not?
Sure, it should be flooded, and I think it'd be great for BC if they want to. It'll be a beautiful park up there. It'd be, it's probably one of the best fishing sites I've ever seen. The fishing up there right now is incredible, and only by flooding it, you probably put more fish in it.
This is sacrilege to you, Dr. Perry.
Well, it's also not true. The Ross Lake now, or Ross Reservoir, is the largest water body in Washington State which doesn't require stocking. The reason is that the spawning grounds in the Skagit River in Canada. If those are flooded, the fishing will probably collapse.
But anyway, he says and you say it'll still be a idyllic recreational area. You say no, it'll ruin it.
Well, it will flood what is unique in the lower mainland. We have many large reservoirs, we have many large natural lakes, and we have the sea all around us. We have very few rivers which are suitable for fly fishing and canoeing. We have very little flat land.
Save the river, really.
And the flat land.
Go ahead from Kelowna.
Yes, hi, how you doing? I'd just like to say this. I think the Canadians have made a deal, and they should stick to the deal. You know, it's things like this that make me ashamed to be a Canadian. The city of Seattle made a good deal at the time, and we should be willing to stick by it. We've accepted the money. It's a contract, and that's all I have to say about it.
Thank you. That's another opponent for you.
They're entitled to their opinions.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I would like to say that the Skagit Valley should not be flooded, and I want to know what's going to happen to all the animals.
Well, there's the estimate of the International Joint Commission which studied this question is that about 80% of the deer would be lost because they depend on the valley bottom as spring range. When they come out of the hills in the spring pregnant, they require high protein feed which they get on the valley floor. That will be underwater.
That's probably true.
They'll be
that
gone.
Some of the deer would lose their leg.
Jack, there's always gives one side and the other side. Nobody denies that. Nothing's perfect. This isn't a black and white world. It's a gray world, and you take the total. But the areas on the side, I personally, and I'm not an authority, so it's just talk, but I honestly don't believe, as Dr. Perry says, that 80% of the deer would be lost. As a matter of fact, they told me that there wouldn't be any fish in the Williston Reservoir, and it's one of the best fishing areas we've got in the north.
Oh, that's the one named after you. I'd
That's
forgotten
right.
that. And you didn't clear the valley bottom, did you?
We cleared the sides and
But
so
you
on.
didn't clear the bottom.
We didn't clear the bottom. It's one of the best fishing areas we've got in the north.
Is that true?
Well, I don't know. I can tell you he's not very popular up in that area. I've worked there recently, and there are a lot of people there are not fans of that reservoir.
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yep.
I think the Canadians should honor their deal they made, whether it's good or bad. It's too late for that now.
Thank you. Yes.
They sold their house, and it was too early when they sold it, and they lost a lot of money on it. That's the way it is. I'd like to also say, Jack?
Yep.
I'd like to know who's going to clear the land and who's going to pay the cost of clearing this land. I'd hate to see, I like to camp myself. I'd hate to see a lot of treetops.
Okay,
You know,
Mr.
the top of the
Williston,
lake.
who's gonna clear the valley floor, and will it be cleared properly?
And it has to be cleared and cleared right down for recreational purposes up at the flood line to maintain it. Yes, it has to be cleared
Are the Americans
properly,
going to pay for that?
and the Americans have to pay every nickel out of that and put in the new roads as well.
Are there going to be more campsites?
There'll be, obviously, campsites are in relation to need, and there's only one campsite up there now, and the rest of the people have been camping on the City of Seattle land. There will obviously have to be a great, great increase in the campsite areas up there with it.
Is there room for campsites? Thank you, sir. Do you believe that would be campsites put in if it's flooded, when it's flooded?
Oh, I think I'm sure that there would be. The agreement with Seattle is, as Mr. Williston described it. That's the first thing I agree with him on today.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi, good morning. I was just wondering in regards to the flooding of the Ross and that area there, how would it interfere very much with Silver Hope Lake?
Silver Hope Lake?
Not at all.
Agreed again, not at all. Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd like to voice an opinion. I don't phone you guys very often, or I haven't phoned you before, really.
Right.
But I agree that we signed an agreement with the United States, and we should honor that agreement. But I don't think that they should put in a great big blacktop highway like they did at Alouette Lake. Now, I've been fishing the Ross Lake since about '55, and it is a nice area. But I still agree that we did make an agreement, and we should stand by it.
A good question for Dr. Perry. What kind of backing have you got, really, in terms of numbers, to renege on the contract with or to cancel this bad contract with the Americans?
Well, let me just remind you again that there is considerable disagreement whether the contract is valid in the first place. We don't feel so. The British Columbia government has made an official legal case. This is not my opinion. This is the Attorney General of British Columbia's opinion that the agreement is not legal. So let's get that straight. We're not going back on an agreement which is established.
Well, my own honest opinion is that the whole thing is fictitious, that going back to 1942 to try and change something in 1942 is just playing with words.
What you're telling me really is that if the BC government, as Dr. Perry says, now says there may not be a contract, it could be illegal, they're just bending with the political wind.
I think if a man's word is not worth anything, then nothing is worth anything, and they worked on the basis of the people of British Columbia who spoke for the people of British Columbia. And if you're going to play with words in 1942, in 1980, well, then play with words. But you asked me my opinion, and that's my opinion. And
I think it comes down to this. Mr. Williston has shown us today that he did not have a command of the facts. He did not know what he was doing in 1967.
He may have shown you, he hasn't shown me.
He has no idea what the compensation agreement was for originally. He's told you it
was
worth...
There, 34.5
He's told you that it was worth 50% of the power generated. I've told you it was 2%, and I've got the facts to back it.
Oh, you're going 2% of the total, and he's going 50% of the 6,000 acre-feet.
No, of the electricity generated. He's told you we were going to get a 50-50 split.
But he now says, well, he's wrong on the total thing and he's right on the agreement.
All I'm saying, Jack, is that I don't see why we should be penalized when it was our land in the first place for a stupid mistake that Mr. Williston and his cronies made at the time.
Mr. Williston.
I just object to that. That agreement was reached. The people bought the land in 31. They leased it in 41. They surveyed it in 41. And for him to come back here and say that I made that agreement in 1967 is just balderdash.
And I think that's a fair response. I don't think it's, well, you say
that's absolute balderdash.
You have to study the record, and I think a lot of it will be explained in this book. That's the reason we've written it.
No, I wouldn't necessarily believe what was in the book.
Well, look at the references then.
I know there was a contract made.
This book is reference to documents of the federal government, of the provincial government, of the International Joint Commission. This is not a figment of my imagination.
You know, I kind of think you're spoiling your case by saying that Williston may have made an unwise agreement, but the agreement was made.
But you've got to look at the history of it. You've got to go back and look at the transcript in 1942. Look at the Seattle Light engineers talking about a valley that they'd never seen. Look at the BC government people talking about a valley of which they hadn't even seen the survey map.
When I came to Vancouver in 47, you could buy the nicest house in Shaughnessy for $8,000, $1,000 down.
The question is, are you going to be so hidebound that you'll sell out your own land? Whether this land belongs to us is a philosophical question, but it certainly doesn't belong to the city of Seattle.
I'm going to keep my word, and you haven't convinced me that a contract wasn't legally authorized by the legislature and signed, right or wrong, by this man here for the government of British Columbia with the city of Seattle.
Well, that whole question is up before the International Joint Commission for adjudication.
Well, will the International Joint Commission pay Seattle the damages?
The IJC is now trying to get the both sides back to the table.
But who's going to pay the damages? Who's going to pay the damages?
Well, the IJC won't pay the damages because they'll have to pay it on behalf of Canada and the United States, and there's absolutely no way they're going to do that on their own decision.
No, it's obviously not them. I'd like to see Mr. Williston take a share of it since he's the one who sold it in the first place. But
if you're talking about
energy,
and you're talking about taking away energy, the best kind of energy at the time of an energy crisis, then I'd have to have my head examined to go that direction.
After the break. Without fear of contradiction, I'm going to tell you this is the first television program or report in which the issues have been laid out so clearly as to what the physical score is and the factual score is between British Columbia, the City of Seattle, the IJC, and Ross, run Out the Skagit Spoilers. We were lucky to have Ray Williston here this morning, whom I leaned on yesterday to come here, you will agree.
I'll agree.
I'll agree. So that I didn't get a one-sided story from Ross, because, you see, basically, I'm suspicious. I mean, Greenpeace has put me off environment beyond belief, and I'm not impugning your integrity, but this kind of thing, you got to get down to nitty-gritty so you can attempt to understand
I'd like to know, Jack, why you are suspicious. After all, I'm not the only person involved in the Ross Committee. There are hundreds of us who've been investing years.
Well, I'm suspicious for this reason.
What have we got to gain?
We are on the edge of a calamitous, a very difficult recession. Power, I'll take this from Mr. Williston, is essential. There is an alternate use of the Skagit Valley, not for the specialist hikers and canoers, but for the common people.
That's right, it's for
And
people
I have
like
a strong suspicion, well, I want a place where I can go and rent a boat and rods and go out in the lake for a day and come back again, have a picnic site where I can barbecue my fish or a steak.
You can do that now.
No, but I think this dam would probably be better for the Webster and the kids than a wilderness area. I mean, that's my own selfish
What
belief.
about the people who want to see deer in a natural environment? What about the older people who want to walk on flat land?
We've got the most wonderful hunting country in British Columbia.
What about the older ones that can't go up
miles.
to the top of Manning Park?
Well, I'm one of the older ones.
No, you're not that old yet.
Well, I don't go up the top of Manning Park except in my car when the Fraser Canyon is closed. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Webster. I have 2 points to make. The first one is that I wouldn't trust any decision of the International Joint Commission, considering the treachery of the Alaska Panhandle when we were deprived of all the fishing rights in the northern waters.
You're going back into British history, and we don't need that on this program.
All right, the second one then. Hello?
Yes, yes.
Well, I understand that the Columbia River contract was a firm contract, and even Mr. Bonnet.
Ma'am, the Columbia River Treaty has really got no relationship to this.
Well, I know, but they're going to renegotiate benefits, and if they could do that, they could sort of bring in the Skagit.
Okay, ma'am, let's cut her off.
Look.
What they're going to do in the Columbia is when the 30-year period ends, we give 10 years notice to decide what we're going to do with the downstream benefits.
That's right. We're not renegotiating. Those are our benefits. We're not renegotiating. We can decide what we're going to do with
We decide
it.
in 10 years what we're going to do with the downstream benefits.
It's a good point, though. I'd point out that one of the options for British Columbia as compensation for Seattle is to forgo our right to divert the Kootenai River. We have that under the treaty, and we could, given that there's substantial opposition to it.
Was that the original dam proposition in the Kootenai?
That's right.
Long time ago.
Right.
We still have the right to do it. That's to Mr. Williston's credit.
Matter of fact, Mr. Bennett was accused of giving that all away for $1 million at one time, and it was cancelled, wasn't it?
That's right. And we were the people, you know, the doctor says I'm against flooding. You know, the great business and the McNaughton plan and everything that the NDP were for was flooding that whole East Kootenai Valley right from the border right up to Golden. I'm talking about 6,000 acres. They make me look as though I'm, I don't know what. And we stopped that cold in its track.
I'm grateful for your forthright and outspoken presence this morning. We'll adjourn this meeting and continue with it on the next occasion. In fact, if you're watching on the Seattle cable, I got to get the mayor of Seattle up and some of the Ross dam engineers. Got to get the Americans in on this because Dr. Perry tells me that many Americans in Washington State want to see the High Ross scrapped because they object to the flooding. Is that
They've
correct?
got a lot to lose, too. They're going to lose a similar wilderness valley.
Here's one man, Dr. Perry, who says the contract can be scrapped. Here's Ray Williston, who says if we scrap that contract or slip out of it, we have no integrity as a state, a people, or a nation.
We better pay. We better be prepared to pay.
My thanks to each of you.
Thank you.
Next, Sid Segal and Tracy. Oh, it doesn't matter if they move, Fred. Who cares? We're all... Oh, yeah, you'll rip off your tie after the break.
Oh, yeah.
I did a walkabout at the Senator Hotel on Granville Street, the refuge for youngsters involved in the downtown thing, you know, prostitution, drugs, delinquency, etc. I couldn't use it this morning. So to all the people at the Senator, including Linda Zingara, I hereby promise solemnly and declare that the Senator segment, 3 segments of it, will be on off the top of the program tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Recently, I've been quite deeply involved in interviewing youngsters at the juvenile jail. Kind of heartbreaking. 10% of them shouldn't be there because they suffer from severe emotional problems, and they're due to go into the reconstituted Maples Treatment Center. Now, when I was making my inquiries about the Maples last week, there was suddenly a flurry of activity in the Ministry of Health in Victoria. And after 2 years of waffling, bureaucratic confusion, ministerial indecision, and medical nitpicking, a decision was finally made to turn over the Maples to the Forensic Psychiatric Services Commission of British Columbia. So that means that, what's his name, Dr. John Duffy is in overall charge of the Maples, and Dr. Brian Harris will be the executive director of the Maples. Now, a lot of people are not very happy about this decision to give it to the medical profession, although somebody had to have a clear control of the place. And this morning I've got some people from an organization in TRACY, taking responsible action. What does it mean again?
For children and youth.
For children and youth. Yeah. This is Dr. Sidney Segal, an old medical friend of mine. With them also is Mae Gross. Your title, Mae?
Well, I'm past president of TRACY.
And this woman here, whose name I don't even know?
Jan Bulman.
Jan Bulman. Yes. You are
their staff, executive director.
Of TRACY. Let's go first to you for the particular area of this child problem in which you are keenly interested.
Well, you know, Jack, my keen interest is in promoting voluntary initiative. And when the Children's Aid Society was broken up, we lost a great deal in the way of human, volunteer, personal initiative, and a lot of specialists who could do a lot for children and for directing government and the provincial policy as a whole. And now I'm very anxious, as my friends, other friends in TRACY, to rejuvenate this voluntary spirit because, as you know, money is becoming scarce. Children are becoming more and more pushed by the wayside because they're frills. And I think that we have to do a great deal more, not only because of the voluntary effort being exceptionally
I must confess that I've fallen into this bureaucratic trap too, in that one no longer, even in my business, looks to a voluntary organization to tell you what they're doing or what they can do. One takes it as a kind of matter of fact that, oh, you got to give it to the bureaucrats, whether they're medical bureaucrats, human resources bureaucrats, or educational bureaucrats.
We've fallen into that trap, all of us. You're right.
Okay, let's speak to Mae. You've taken a great interest for a long time on this. What area of youngsters needs the most help from volunteers?
Well, Jack, the thing is to find an avenue, as you say, for volunteerism. And we came into business because the preventive programs disappeared when Children's Aid was taken over. And the resource boards that had an excellent concept, and it would have extended regionalism, neighborhoods, and all that sort of thing, they disappeared next.
But some of the resource boards were a political disaster.
That could be, Jack. I'm not going to quarrel about that one.
No, I was involved in attacking one of them.
The concept is what I said, was a good one, because when we lost the Children's Aid, we lost a lot of preventive programs.
Now I'll go to Jan Bulman. Do you have a big professional staff, or do you work all with volunteers with yourself as executive director?
We don't have a huge staff. The board really are the workhorses of TRACY.
Do you live on government money?
Not a bit. We can't, because we can't bug and bawl the government out if we take a cent from the provincial government. We work entirely through donations and memberships.
All right, now what do you do?
Well, right now we're into 5 really quite large things that the board has a couple of times a year has a retreat and decides what they can bite off. And to do that, usually we have to attract money to do it, because we just get $10,000 a year from United Way, which lets me work 2 days a week. So and then we also employ the Children's Play Resource Center staff 2 days a week. So we're not heavily staffed. We really have to work with really concerned board members, and it's up to them to decide what's hot, what they can do about it.
All right. Teenage Mothers Education and Infant Care Project.
Well, that's really going great guns right now, because we've had a big boost from the Vancouver City. They want
these the kids, the high school kids who have babies.
Right. What are you going to do about this? It's a real problem. It exists.
Do we have many?
Yes, in Vancouver, the last really good figures from the Department of Health were 270 women under 19 had babies in 78, 79.
That's down to about 13, no doubt.
Down?
To about 13 or 14 years of age.
Very few at that age, but we had the figures right down to 13 and 14 years of age. Yeah.
And what do? Do you help them to cope? Or
well, what the board feels is that they're kind of trapped. The figures right across the country show that if they don't finish education before they're 19, their welfare, they're just under, they have a pretty poverty.
And do we send them back to school?
Well, there's 3 models, and we've just hired staff. At least we're in the point of hiring a half-time staff with some City Hall money, because they want to see some programs for these young mothers. And we have 3 models. Toronto, Calgary, and Victoria are doing really interesting things.
Can these kids cope on their own?
Who can cope on their own? The thing is to get support services for them.
This is more teenage mothers than we've had for years, isn't it?
That's right, Jack, and I think the increase will continue. I think there's another aspect to this too, isn't there, Jan, that these particular infants in the school project will also be used for instruction to other children, pupils, who will learn something about the values and the requirements.
Is this because of no abortions?
No, I don't think
Is this because of a lessening of abortions?
I don't think it has anything to do with abortions. It has a lot to do with that sexual activity, which is here with us.
Good old days in Children's Aid, the youngster would have a baby, Children's Aid would step in, or the Catholic Children's Aid, and the child would be adopted out. There's a whole new tenor then.
That's right. There's a whole new move for the child to keep her child.
And there's lack of understanding, Jack, of what bringing a child up entails. And some of these kids are being returned, and the mothers are saying, look, I can't cope anymore. This little 2-year-old is driving me up the wall.
And she might be 17. I know.
She may not even be 17.
16.
And these babies by that age have not had the care they need.
Okay, more with Dr. Segal, Mae Gross, and
Jan Bulman.
Jan Bulman after the break. Two or three things to cover in 7 minutes. When I was down at the cemetery yesterday, one of the workers was telling me that as high as 80% of the problem kids started off with abuse, physical or sexual, in their own homes. Would you go for that?
Oh, yes, no question about it.
80%?
80%.
A lot is unreported until sometimes it's too late.
And this seems to be a particular key and spark which puts the kid out in the cold and on the streets.
Of course, part of it, Jack, is not physical abuse, and it's very hard to get at constant psychological debasing, destruction of one's self-image.
That's sometimes worse than physical abuse.
It certainly is.
You're no good, useless little creature, you, etc., etc.
I'd rather have broken bones than that,
Easier to deal with.
Sure.
Now, I see here you've got, I want to know how many volunteers you have.
85. I counted up. I thought you might be interested in that.
What do they do?
They largely sit on committees, struggle away with either working on a pilot project, writing a brief, bugging somebody, trying to find statistics, that kind of thing.
You have a children's play center.
Yeah.
The volunteers work there.
Yes, they do, and they sell a book, Let Your Children Play, that's into its second printing, which isn't bad for BC. You can, for $2 a year, you can come in and borrow resources at the Children's Play Resource Center, and it's staffed Tuesday and Thursday.
For how much?
$2 a year, you can take out the resources.
All right, Play in Hospital project.
That was an excellent concept, Jack, with all the children who are in pediatric wards, and lots of times, you know, the fears and everything they have. And if they can bring a play situation in, it's not only play for children, which is important, but they can use dolls, puppets, you name it, to help the child understand his illness.
Is this working now?
Yes. They canvassed over 80 hospitals with pediatric wards. They got on about 90% response.
Do you use your volunteers in that kind of way?
In the Play in Hospital project, it's pretty specific. It's we've gone to 4 centers in BC: Prince George, Fort St. John, Kamloops, and Surrey, and done training how to get better play for kids in hospitals. And from that, we got a resource kit, which has gone to another 16 without the supportive staff. We didn't have the money to keep the supportive staff.
Dr. Segal, do adolescents have a tougher time today than any time in our previous history, do you think?
I think they do, Jack. They're trying to grow up fast. They have to grow up fast, and sometimes we don't treat them as growing up people. We still treat them as children.
How do you cope with them today, then?
Oh, I don't know the complete answer to how you cope. I think you've got to give them the opportunity to grow and to give them responsibility.
Well, I'm in a kind of depressed mood this morning. Has the collapse of the standard family in many ways contributed to all this problem?
Oh, yes, I'm very sure that that's key to the whole thing. The collapse of the standard family and the collapse of the presence of grandparents and aunts and uncles in the home. I'm sure that was a great stabilizing influence.
No family unit whatsoever.
Exactly.
Father's out on unemployment insurance, mother's out to work, or vice versa.
Yes.
And daycare. Is daycare good for kids?
Quality daycare, Jack, is excellent and can contribute a great deal. And Tracy's been very active in trying to get something more going on daycare.
Or on the quality of daycare?
It's the quality, it's both. It's very important that there be quality. Because children need to have this feeling of belonging. That they, you know, there are 3 A's for children, Jack. It's acceptance, affection, and approval. And they need that from day one. And Dr. Guy Richmond out of Ocala used to say the most important thing for children was this feeling that they belonged. When you showed that little girl on your TV program, 44 foster homes, I just felt, what do you do?
Show this little girl, I want to go to school. Why can't you go to school? I'm here in a man. If you got out today, where would you go? I'd go into another foster home. I've been in 42 already. She went up to court, this very attractive little girl, and the next day she was freed and sent to a foster home. She stayed there 2 nights, left a note in her pillow.
Yeah.
She was on the loose again.
How can she ever belong anywhere, Jack? If you haven't experienced love and belonging, how can you ever give it to somebody else?
And we obviously can't leave it to the bureaucrats all the time, even the bureaucrat doctors, can we say?
No, the bureaucrat doctors are amongst them. But you know, the new Children's Act makes it even worse. You can't help these people without declaring a child in need of protection, which is very demoralizing to parents.
You're talking about the new Juvenile Delinquency Act?
No, I'm talking about the one that deals with family and children's care.
Child and Family Services Act.
Here?
Yes, the thing that replaced the protective legislation.
And so therefore they've got to become really a ward of the superintendent.
Well, they don't have to become, well, yes, they do. Yes, they do have to. You have to declare parents unfit before you can just give them a leg up to help them keep their family intact. It really is a most demoralizing situation.
What's this act called? Family Relations Act.
That's right. No,
Okay.
no, it's not Family
Services Act,
I think. No.
Child and Family Services, I think.
Family Services.
We'll find out about that
Family
later.
Children's
What's the telephone number for, what kind of people do you want as volunteers?
People that can slug 10 hours a month on detailed committee work that'll come a couple of times a month on a standing committee. That would be the TRACY kind of advocacy and research and preventive stuff. The Children's Play Resource Center is using several volunteers to actually deal with people who come in for resources. The kind of volunteers we need are people who can tough through pilot projects and thinking through what's needed to press the government on new services.
You want fairly mature people with some experience in talking and typing and administrative work?
That's right. Yeah.
And you also occasionally need helpers of some kind.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Number?
732-3305.
And they could find out if they come to our annual meeting, couldn't they, Jan?
Right, which is?
Which is?
18th of March. And Mr. Justice Tom Berger is going to talk about
Human rights and children's rights.
human rights and children's rights.
And Jack, we also need membership, because if we can say we speak for a large number
How
of
much
people.
for a member?
$5 and $25 for an organization.
732-3305. TRACY, the acronym which means taking responsible action
for children and youth.
for children and youth. TRACY,
Right,
did you think of that?
I did.
Quite smart.
That's true. She had a hard time figuring out what to put for why.
Yeah, but in that case, we'll give you a gold star.
Thank you,
My
Jack.
thanks to Sid Segal, Mae Gross, and Jan
Bulman.
Thanks for inviting
And I'll be back after the break.
Thank you, Jack.
Sorry, we gave you the wrong number for TRACY. The number is... Oh, they've got it right this time. Congratulations over there. 732-3305. Tomorrow morning, to Little Risky and Linda Zangara and whatnot down at the Centre Hotel. Off the top, no kidding, 9 a.m. precisely. That'll be part four of Children in Trouble. Thanks to TRACY and Williston and Perry and Uncle Tom Cobley. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. precisely. Skagit Valley Battle, Check TV, midnight precisely.